Chers fidèles lecteurs et spectateurs, comme la guerre froide se réchauffe, le temps est venu pour nous de répondre à la lancinante question « De quoi le communisme est-il le nom ?» Pour beaucoup d'entre vous, c'est un nouveau paradigme. Et je parie que beaucoup aussi se disent « Je ne suis qu'un jeune créatif, un peu ignorant de la politique, je ne connais même pas de communistes, que puis-je faire ?» Alors sachez que vous êtes un cas courant. C'est pourquoi nous avons justement fait ce film pour vous. Et pour entrer tout de suite dans le vif de notre sujet, j'ai ressorti mes bons vieux transparents. Donc voyons ça. Que faire? Pour lutter contre le communisme, il faut d'abord le reconnaître parmi les variants socialistes. En d'autres termes, connaître son ennemi. Donc voici vos premières leçons pratiques. Et pour vous mettre tout de suite dans le bain, ce sera en version originale sous-titrée.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing. If he openly declares himself to be a communist, we take his word for it. If a person consistently reads and advocates the views expressed in a communist publication, he may be a communist. If a person supports organizations which reflect communist teachings, or organizations labeled communist by the Department of Justice, she may be a communist. If a person defends the activities of communist nations while consistently attacking the domestic and foreign policy of the United States, she may be a communist. If a person does all these things over a period of time, he must be a communist. But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
We're going to talk about this. Look at this. I got this email. It's from Google AdSense, right? Because I'm on the YouTubes, which is owned by Google, which I guess is owned by Alphabet, which I'm sure is owned by another company. Google, it's all one company, I'm pretty sure. That's the whole goal, right? Isn't the whole goal one company? So this is what we got in the mail. I think it was today. It's from Google AdSense. So Google AdSense is what places the ads on all the videos on YouTube. And it says this: due to the war in Ukraine, we will pause monetization on content that exploits, dismisses, or condones the war. I don't really think they're doing that, because there's lots of content that condones the war that they're A-okay with. We've been telling you about it at MSNBC. They're actually calling for more war. Please note, we have already been enforcing on claims related to the war in Ukraine when they violated existing policies. For instance, the dangerous or derogatory content policy prohibits monetizing content that incites violence or denies tragic events. Well, they're certainly not doing this, because every reporter I've seen has been calling for more violence in Ukraine. They've been calling for more war. They've called for more direct intervention. Sean Penn said we can't be intimidated into not using nuclear weapons. What do you call that? They've been calling for more war in Ukraine on a daily basis on YouTube. Not only news people, but politicians. Adam Schiff says we're shipping arms to Ukraine so we can fight the Russians over there instead of fight them here. What is that called? That video's still up on YouTube. So none of this makes sense. All this is propaganda speak, so they can point to something when they want to censor you. And here's what else they said. This update is meant to clarify and in some cases expand our publisher guidance as it relates to this conflict. The pause includes, but is not limited to, claims that imply victims are responsible for their own tragedy or similar. I guess if you say that Ukraine provoked this attack, or then you couldn't say that. Does that mean you can't say that? That's what that sounds like. Such claims that the Ukraine is committing genocide. What if Ukraine is committing genocide? Do you think only one country is capable of that? What happens if they do that? or deliberately attacking its own citizens. What if they do that? What if they, because that's how the whole Maidan coup happened in 2014. That actually happened. They attacked their own citizens. The people who wanted to overthrow the government attacked their own citizens, which was the neo-Nazis. And so I checked to see if they've demonetized. So this is still, our monetization is still on here, where I showed him demanding war, Ali Veshi, and saying we need direct military intervention with the United States and Russia and Ukraine. And that's still monetized. Also, here is Scott Ritter, when he came on to talk about how the accusation of a war crime committed by Russia and Bucha was probably false flag. He came on to talk about that. That's still monetized. So I think what they're doing is they're just letting you know they're going to be using those as a guise to censor you. Max, what do you make of this?
Well, remember that before February 24th, when Russian forces went into Ukraine, the U.S. State Department and the Biden administration generally was warning that Russia was going to stage a false flag attack. In other words, Russia was going to attack either its own population or ethnic Russians, the so-called pro-Russian separatists of the Donbass region. So the Biden administration was engaging in activity that was, you would think would be forbidden under this policy, because basically you're not allowed to allege that false flag attacks have occurred at any point in Ukraine. You will be punished and demonetized if you do so, even if you present concrete, overwhelming evidence that this has taken place. And we've seen so many deceptions since the war began, starting with Zelensky alleging that 13 Ukrainian border guards were killed by this Russian battleship after saying, F you, Russian.
Yeah.
And then they turn up alive. They had surrendered peacefully and Zelensky lied. Then the ghost of Kiev, the dumbest man in Congress, Adam Kinzinger, retweeting Samuel Hyde, the Philadelphia-based comedian, claiming to be this Ukrainian fighter pilot, the ghost of Kiev, who had taken down 40 Russian jets. Turned out it was just a prank. There was no ghost of Kiev.
Yes.
And just, we can go down the line with bogus stories.
On and on.
On and on. And so Google, which is a military and intelligence contractor, has been called in to prevent any questioning of the official narrative here under the grounds of preventing victim blaming, yes, which shows that they've clearly taken a side in this conflict. Who are the victims? Well, we saw a Tochka-U missile, I believe that's what it's called, a ballistic missile, hit the center of Donetsk during the second week of the war, I believe. Patrick, I'll think of his name in a second. Patrick Lancaster. There's so many Patricks. Patrick Lancaster, thank you, is a Donetsk-based U.S. journalist who's actually a U.S. Army veteran, and he was there on the scene to film how Ukrainian forces had bombed actually their own people, technically, according to the U.S. This is Ukraine, but these are ethnic Russians who are fighting to be separate and independent. And this was just an attack on the civilian population. Lancaster walked up in a bus and found blown up bodies in there, showed this. And then we heard last week about a train station in the city, I believe, of Kramatorsk, where another missile, an identical missile to this, which is said to be possessed by Ukrainian forces and not Russian forces, hit a train station. The missile was marked, the ballistic missile was marked for the kids in Ukrainian, which would suggest that whoever had inscribed those words on the missile was seeking revenge for children. And who has been saying that our children are being killed? I don't want to answer the question because I don't want you to get demonetized. Right. There's a serial number on that missile. The serial number suggests it belongs to one side, and it wasn't the side we were being told had fired it. And it's very common in these kinds of conflicts for there to be misfires, for missiles to be either shot down or to fall in their own on areas that weren't expected. But we got one side of the narrative that I think may have been incorrect here when it comes to this train station attack. But you can see right now that I'm hesitant to even offer my opinion on what actually took place. But there are ways of deducing who the missile belonged to, what the intent behind the launch was, and who possessed it in their arsenal. And according to Google, you're not really allowed to put those facts forward without being punished.
That's right. So people don't realize Google, YouTube, they're military industrial complex contractors, intelligence community. And I remember Google used to have their slogan used to be "Do no evil." Then they started doing evil with the intelligence community and contractors. Right? They're helping you be spied on and things like that.
Yeah.
And didn't they also blur out parts of Gaza? Doesn't Google Maps do stuff like that all the time? That's kind of nefarious.
Well, Google Maps would also blur out areas where Israeli intelligence would tell them blur these out because these are secret bases. I mean,
okay.
They do all kinds of favors. I think Eric Schmidt, who is the former CEO, he's consulted for the Pentagon on competing with China on AI. In Amazon, which owns the Washington Post, they host the CIA's cloud. That's one of the biggest contracts they've gotten.
That's right.
They have a huge contract with the Pentagon.
That's right.
They're not just like friendly.
That's right.
What was that movie with the movie about Google that just presented them as this friendly, like fun workplace where like coders can go? And, what was that guy? Owen Wilson was in it, and he just
was who they worked for.
Something like that.
Was that him and Vince Vaughn? Double V?
Yeah, and it was
just watched that.
And Vince Vaughn. It's just complete Silicon Valley propaganda.
Yes,
but I mean, the reality is a lot more. It's a whole lot darker than that.
Yes. Okay, well, there you go. Now you know how the corporation that's a military-industrial complex that owns a social media platform, the biggest in the world, is going to help censor for the government. There you go. Come see a live stand-up show or be in Orlando, Tampa, Cleveland, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Las Vegas, Omaha, Des Moines, everywhere. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for our live show tickets. Also, become a premium member and get access to all our extra stuff and help support the show. See you at a live show. Single tickets now available. Single tickets available.
To be in every home library. It's entitled Color, Communism, and Common Sense by Manning Johnson. Manning Johnson was a Negro, and he was also a member of the Communist Party. He joined the party as a young man because he honestly believed that the communists were trying to improve the conditions of his people. He was a dedicated communist. But after many years, Manning Johnson finally came to the realization that the communists weren't the least bit interested in improving the conditions of the Negro people. He discovered that instead they were merely planning to use his people, and these are his words, to use them as cannon fodder in a bloody revolution to destroy America. As early as 1928, the communists declared that the racial differences among our people constituted the weakest and most vulnerable point in our social fabric. By constantly probing and straining at this one spot, they calculated that eventually the cloth could be torn apart and that Americans could be divided, weakened, and perhaps even set against each other in open combat. We must not be led into placing the blame for the riots, the civil disorders, on the Negro people of our nation. Even those few who are promoting hatred and violence in the black communities are not themselves the cause. They're merely being used by forces far bigger than they are to promote the violent phase of the revolution in America. Hoping to avoid further violence and bloodshed, the public is to be pressured into accepting measures that will move the country gradually and legally toward communism, but without calling it that. The strategy of the proletarian revolution calls for the quiet conversion of our government into a communist regime, but under the banner of socialism. The new program of the Communist Party on this subject has this to say. The term socialism describes but the first stage of a new society that in its full development is called communism. Socialism is a transitional stage. The building of socialism is the communist revolution in America. It represents the process whereby our country can be moved gradually toward communism without the people even being aware of it. They have one and only one solution for all problems: more government, and then more and more until it's total government. Total government is communism. We must not be fooled into thinking that the causes of our civil turmoil are such things as poverty, poor housing, lack of education, and similar social or economic factors. As a matter of fact, most of today's self-styled revolutionaries, black and white, come from good homes, could earn better than average incomes if they wanted to work. And in fact, they're products of some of the finest institutions of higher learning. We mustn't resort to violence either as a means of furthering political or social goals. And we must do everything humanly possible to discourage others from doing so. We must support our local police. Nothing can be quite so damaging to police morale and efficiency as converting every arrest into a trial of the policeman instead of the criminal. Now, in passing, ladies and gentlemen, you may have wondered why the Communist Party has been a staunch supporter of the drive to place a black studies curriculum into our high schools and colleges. Well, the reason becomes obvious the minute you take a look at the textbooks and the study guides. Under the guise of academic balance, these courses have become a brilliant device for conditioning young people to accept still one more part of the total program for revolution. We must discover the identity of those individuals, both above and below, who consciously are furthering the communist program for revolution, and then remove them from their positions of trust and leadership. Now, of course, the minute you begin to think along these lines, you'll become the target of a whole barrage of attacks. You'll be called a right-wing extremist, a fascist, or at least a dictator. Some years ago, I happened to attend a meeting where several anti-communist refugees from behind the Iron Curtain were called upon to relate their personal experiences. One of the refugees spoke up and he said, "You know, I came to America expecting to find a nation of free men, but instead, I find exactly the same thing. Everywhere I look, I see men and women who know that communists are making headway in this country. They know that something must be done and that someone must stand up to them. But they themselves do nothing. They remain silent because they're afraid that if they speak out or take a stand publicly, it'll be bad for business. They may lose a client. They may even lose their jobs. If communism should ever come to America, we'll face more death, destruction, and human suffering than any people in history has ever faced at the hands of their invading conquerors. It's literally a question of life and death for all of us. And it's about time the American people began to face up to that fact and to act accordingly. Thank you.